They're interpreters that, are going from someone filing a claim about a fender bender with their car to a pre-op discussion before open heart surgery.
Speaking about integration, I asked Benjamin, how is he going to integrate all of those TMSs and CAT tools?
Not super surprising, I suppose, given that Acolad has had a history of doing quite a lot of M&A.
And welcome to Slater Pod, your favorite language industry podcast. Hello from Zurich.
Hi from London.
Hey, and let me ask you something. Please, listeners, viewers, hit that subscribe button, okay, on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. It does help us get a little bit more exposure. So thanks for that. In advance, we're at episode 40. What does 40 tell us? The big 4-0. I remember the big 3-0. Now we're at the big 4-0. 2 years ago, I turned 40. And as we Swiss tend to do, I went kegeln. Do you know what kegeln is?
No, I don't. I'd love to know.
It's a terrible... no, I shouldn't say terrible. It's a kind of Swiss bowling where the... I don't know. What do you call the thing that you bowl?
Ball? Bowling ball?
The bowling ball? Yeah, it's gigantic. It's a lot heavier. It's probably twice the size of a normal bowling ball. And the distance is shorter. And I guess the rules are somewhat the same. So we basically went to a converted farm, which in the former stables converted it to a, that Swiss bowling alley. And it was a lot of fun. But I don't remember too much of it.
I feel like every culture has their own form of bowling, Like the French have got pétanque, we've got whatever.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay. Well, I'm only familiar with the kind of American bowling and whatever we have here, right? The kegeln. All right, we're not going to kegeln today. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. First, of course, is another mega merger, mega acquisition in the language industry where Acolad, French Acolad, buys AMPLEXOR, a Luxembourg-based company, but, kind of pan-European. We're going to talk a bit about our new product called Real-Time LSP Performance Tracker. Maybe it has a different name, but that's what it does. We're going to talk a bit about some results out of a CIOL survey. That's interesting. And of course, we're going to have another guest. Very, very excited today. We're going to talk to Gene Schriver, who's the CEO of GLOBO, a fast-growing VRI and interpreting and translation company based in Philadelphia. So really looking forward to having Gene on. First, though, Esther, we're going to have to unpack Acolad and AMPLEXOR. No. So when you heard about it, what were your thoughts initially?
My thoughts? Cool. Cool in a way. It's good for us. Something to write about. Keeps it interesting. Not super surprising, I suppose, given that Acolad has had a history of doing quite a lot of M&A, but obviously a lot more sizable than any of the previous acquisitions. I also felt a pang of, what would you call that, nostalgia, I suppose, because because I actually used to live pretty much on the street where AMPLEXOR is based, or Euroscript as they were known. So I was like, I remember walking past their offices on the way home in Luxembourg. There we go.
It was your competitor.
It was my competitor at the time, yeah. In some areas, but not all. Yeah.
So is that like a financial... No, you live there. So what is it, the central business area?
It's not. No, it's Bertrange, or like Stratton, which is... actually my house kind of backed onto fields. But it's still only 20... It's like 20 minutes, I think, bus ride into the city, something like that. So, and about half an hour away from the airport. So it's, it's all very cozy and small.
Fields in Luxembourg.
Yep.
There's not too many left, I suppose.
Hay bales and cows and things on my ride to work.
In such a tiny country. I've never been to Luxembourg. I don't know.
Oh, wow. You are missing out.
I should go. It's close. It's very close. It's probably like a 3-hour train ride.
You should spend exactly half a day there.
Okay.
No, maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
But if you like kind of walking and hiking, there's some good trails and things like that. Climbing,
And it's half a day of city tour, half a day of climbing. All right. Well, that's where a lot of the decision makers maybe are based. I don't actually know where management is based. I think AMPLEXOR's management team is kind of based all across the world, or at least all across Europe. So, well, anyway, we're talking about the second mega deal now, right? After RWS, bid for SDL, and this is still. It's still ongoing. Of course, I think we're going to have a bit more clarity on that deal in probably about 3 to 4 weeks. So Acolad is a group that's based in Paris. Again, AMPLEXOR is based in Luxembourg. That particular transaction is set to close in the fourth quarter of 2020, which, well, technically starts in a couple of days, but I guess it's probably more kind of November. Because they still need antitrust clearance. And maybe we're going to spend a bit of time on that later. It was financed through equity and debt. We don't have pricing, but equity and debt. And the process kicked off pre-COVID. That's what we learned from talking to the Acolad CEO and owner. It's actually not the CEO, it's the president and the owner, Benjamin Dufresne. He said the whole process kicked off pre-COVID. So this has been going on for some time now, this acquisition or this process, right? You need to have investment bankers and put together all the documentation, and then probably they went exclusive at some point. But anyway, let's talk about the process later on. So who is Acolad? So first, personally, I heard about their predecessor company, Technisys, in 2016 when they bought Swiss-based Translation Probst, which was I was based in the city that I actually graduated, Winterthur, which is close to Zurich. It was a very marketing-focused translation, a language service provider, and they acquired them. I think Benjamin Dufresne, I think he's the son of the original founder, and he took over around 2012, 2013. And then he went on an M&A spree. So let me just rattle off a few. So they acquired Translation Probst in 2016, Aranchodoc in 2017, Textmaster, HLTrod, Telelingua, AAC Global in 2018. That's actually in 2018 when we had him at SlatorCon London. He gave a presentation on, guess what, M&A. And then they acquired LiveWords, which is the Dutch-based, I think they were about $30 million, LSP in 2019. And then there was some complicated kind of buying outs. It had a private equity firm, but then that private equity firm exited and the family bought back the majority. So now Benjamin's family owns 65% and the rest is owned by some different private equity. I guess it's too much to go into the detail here. But let's go into this AMPLEXOR deal, because this is really not, I wouldn't call it like super transformative, maybe like SDL, RWS, because that one is just maybe a couple or 1 degree more transformative, but this is a big one, right? So both companies rebranded. You mentioned Euroscript, right? So Euroscript rebranded into Acolad about 4 years ago. Acolad.
Other way around. Euroscript rebranded to AMPLEXOR, yeah.
To
Lots of A's.
Okay, Euroscript rebranded to AMPLEXOR about 4 years ago, and Acolad rebranded from Technisys. Yes. About 1 year ago. So the numbers here are quite large. So AMPLEXOR was around $180 million in revenue in 2019, according to our language service provider Index. Acolad was around $170 million US dollars. That's converted from euro. But that's pro forma because they did all those deals in 2019. So if they had owned all of these businesses in 2019, it would have been $170 million. Now, this is not going to be a $350 million company, though. Why? Because Acolad isn't going to buy the entire business of AMPLEXOR. Apparently, there's like a few business lines that generate around $35 million that are not part of the deal. So they didn't buy the entire AMPLEXOR. I tried to ask. They didn't tell us exactly which units were carved out.
Yeah, I'd like to know what they're kind of leaving behind,
Yeah, we'll find that out, and we'll let you know. This is definitely going to be, we're gonna know this in a couple of weeks. So it's probably something. Well, they told us it's not core like language services business. Okay. I don't know. Maybe it's some of the tech stuff. Maybe it's some of the staffing stuff. I don't know. Talking about staff, the entire company, the combined company has about 2,000 full-time people. So that's quite sizable, right? And so this combination does create, I think, the Continental Europe's largest LSP. You know, you still got, of course, the UK with
Not the UK.
that monster, right? The RWS SDL monster. But this combined company has really deep roots across most of continental European countries, like, you know, Luxembourg, of course, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Switzerland. And then actually via AMPLEXOR, the combined company now has a pretty sizable presence in the US because they acquired Sagen. AMPLEXOR, that is, they acquired Sagen, I think it was Wisconsin-based LSP back in 2017, and they have some operations in China. I remember they had an office in, Euroscript had an office in Suzhou, that's just next to Shanghai. And they did a lot of like tech doc stuff over there. So ownership is also, ownership of Acolad isn't very straightforward, but ownership of AMPLEXOR, you know, well, it's in a sense straightforward, but it's owned by Saarbrücker Zeitung, a newspaper, which in turn is owned by Rheinische Post, whose CEO, Johannes Wehrle, he's the group CEO of Rheinische Post, ran that deal, as far as I know. So in terms of the sectors, the company, you know, life sciences, manufacturing, a lot of that tech doc, you know, and a lot of public sector. I think AMPLEXOR was one of the big European Union vendors. Is that still the case? Do we still see them a lot on those tenders, or?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think they've definitely ramped up on the private side, but yeah, I think they still do participate quite strongly.
Yeah, I mean, they must, right? This is big volume. I mean, I think it used to be like maybe 20 years ago, it was kind of the bulk of their business, but now it's definitely much more on the private side, but they still have quite a lot of business with the European Union. How about the brands, actually, Esther? Is it going to stay, or what are they going to do with the brand?
I think they're going to keep them separate, actually, for now. So AMPLEXOR is going to stay, and then Acolad, obviously, will remain.
Yeah, it's the same with SDL and RWS, right? We don't know. Are they going to...
Well, I thought they'd said they were going to rebrand SDL. Well, obviously, I mean, I thought they had said that.
Okay.
But, I mean, either way, it's going to take time, you know?
Yeah, but Benjamin said they weren't going to rebrand for now. So AMPLEXOR stays.
Yeah.
By the same token, though, they did just tell me that they were going to rebrand two others. I think it was HL Trod and another one. I'm blanking on that. So they're slowly kind of adding those previous acquisitions to the Acolad family of companies. And, you know, let's see if AMPLEXOR stays for, you know, more than 1 or 2 years. Management not yet cleared. I didn't say who's going to be on a combined management team. That's going to be interesting, right? You basically have 2 management teams, and, you know, you're going to have to make some decisions.
Well, yeah,
there.
I mean, and interesting because obviously the businesses are more or less, well, they're very similar in size. So it's not as if you've got one very small company that's just being absorbed by another. There really is a kind of a big integration that has to be done on management as well as processes.
Yeah, and AMPLEXOR hasn't grown that much by acquisition. So they, you know, I have no particular insight, but they're probably going to have a fairly tight management team. So maybe some more, maybe a little bit more integrated than Acolad at this stage yet. Speaking about integration, I asked Benjamin, like, how is he going to integrate all of those TMSs and CAT tools? I keep asking him that each time he buys a new company. And then he said, currently we're in the process of streamlining the global integrated approach to ERP tools, portals for our first 9 acquisitions. So they're still chewing, you know,
chugging through the work, yeah.
Those first 9. And then, yeah, you know, AMPLEXOR has kind of come with another stack of tools and actually own some of that themselves. So I think one other CEO commented on LinkedIn, like, hey, congrats, good luck with the integration. So you're going to just have all of these different tools, and it's a big challenge to integrate that. So, yeah, on the price, we don't know how much they paid, right?
We do not. No, that was not disclosed, sadly.
It was not disclosed. Well, it's going to be... I don't know.
Could speculate.
I can speculate.
Well, I
mean, I don't know, 1.5 times revenue, something around that, right? It's a service vendor, but yeah, again, I'd love to know. So feel free to let me know if you do. So we also discussed with Benjamin a little bit about COVID. So he said that Acolad did suffer a little bit during the early stages in some of their European business, and AMPLEXOR kind of sailed through a little better. So that probably helped with the eventual price. And interesting, for me, interesting was that the advisor for AMPLEXOR was actually the U.S. investment bank William Blair, and I know them. They also helped us sell CLS to Lionbridge back in 2015, and we actually had their managing director Simon Birtle as a speaker at SlatorCon. So I don't know, pretty sure that Simon led that deal or was probably involved. So William Blair is kind of carving itself a little bit of a kind of an LSP niche, right? We
were talking about the other one last week, J Squared Conseil or something, that was also involved in several different deals from a legal perspective. So maybe there is like a little kind of
That's a couple of. It's a little smaller. William Blair is kind of more mid-market, so they would need maybe $50 to $100 million to actually start getting really interested, right? So it's not like the Goldmans and UBSs of the world, but they do need a certain volume. And they did a fantastic job with us at CLS, so now they know the business really well. It's a lot of work. It's so much work. I mean, to sell a company like this, I mean, there's, you're working with like 3 of the top 4 accounting firms and like 7,000 pages of documentation every day, and it's a lot of work, and it's super intense for those investment bankers. So, and what do they get? They get obviously a big fee and one of those tombstones that you can put in your shelf that he did that deal. So, analysis, I guess many are talking about consolidation, but Benjamin really does do the consolidating. So he's done like more than a dozen deals now, and this does create like a market leader. They're active in so many markets. As I said, it still needs antitrust clearance, which is the first time I heard this in the language industry, because everybody says it's so fragmented. So for you to actually need to go to the antitrust authorities to get something approved means you're going to be a big player in in a few markets. So it's kind of perceived as quite a large deal.
Is that the French authorities doing the antitrust?
They didn't say who. Maybe like European. I don't know.
Okay.
Who knows? Then Benjamin seems to be a little tired. I don't know. But he said they don't have any active deals in the pipeline right now because AMPLEXOR was very tough. I think I'm quoting him accurately here. And I also asked him, so what about an IPO eventually? We spoke about these couple of IPOs recently, and he said no IPO. They're going to stay committed to the buy and build. So eventually they're going to ramp the buy up again once they finish this one. So yeah, that's the plan. Continue the same strategy. He's young. He's probably younger than 42. Full circle. Talking about IPO, we just launched a new product that tracks publicly listed company. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
That's right, we did, yes. So we've got a real-time performance tracker for LSPs and other language industry companies, specifically for those that are publicly listed. It tracks 10 different LSPs and language industry companies listed in different markets. So we've got Appen, Straker and AI Media, new to the public market, but they're all based in Australia. RWS, SDL Keywords, and Zoo in the London market, Honyaku Center, Rosetta Core, and Imagica Group, which is SDI Media's parent company, on the Japanese market. So we've got about 10 different ones, and you can toggle back and forth and check their current and historical stock performance.
I love the ticker.
I love the ticker too.
We got the ticker.
Yeah, it moves across the screen. It's dynamic. You can see what's happening there in the markets.
And we're paying way more for the ticker than for the actual other thing, because the ticker does a bunch of API calls as opposed to the actual chart, which is a lot less. I think.
Well, it's nice to have.
It's a nice to have. It's eye-catching. It's a ticker. It goes across the street.
Yeah.
Anyway, go check it out for our pro subscribers. As you see, we're adding a bunch of new features there. So moving on to the Chartered Institute of Linguists, just very briefly, there was an interesting survey. So what were some of the highlights, and maybe, what did we learn from that?
We could pick out a few. I suppose this was a survey of LSPs and linguists, so translators and interpreters, that I think got about 180 responses, and most of those were translators and interpreters, but obviously there were people from the LSP side as well. So this was looking or reflecting on the relationship between LSPs and their linguists. Things like how do they see fees and kind of how does managing assignments go and everything. So overall, pretty good scoring on the relationship, the sort of general feeling towards relationship. LSPs overall, I think only one person said it was neutral, whereas like everybody else said very positive or positive in terms of their feelings towards their relationship with translators and interpreters. Translators and interpreters slightly less, overall very positive, but I mean, again, 44% said positive or very positive, and a few neutral and a few not so positive. But yeah, in terms of what kind of came out of that, I suppose one really interesting thing was they were asked about the preferred method of communication for, on the LSP side, how do you like to propose or send out assignments to your linguists? And then on the linguist side, how do you like to receive your assignments? So is that via email? Is that via a phone call? Obviously, is that via like a TMS, management system, or other? And so, yeah, there was some quite interesting...
What was the thing?
Well, I think the results are interesting, but maybe not so surprising for other people. But basically, everybody on both sides of the camp preferred receiving and proposing assignments by email, personal email. So 80% of linguists, mind blown, yeah, 80% of linguists said they wanted to receive assignments via email, and 67, so 2/3 of LSPs said they like to send out assignments, propose assignments via personal email.
Now, can I just pause you there for a second?
Yeah.
So I wonder if this says a lot about the linguists and LSPs survey. Yeah, because, I mean, we're talking about all of these fantastic tools, right? We just had our last part was with localized, and, you know, with Peter's building there. And these are all very kind of integrated cloud tools and everything. And then basically you're going back and you're doing a survey, and then they're saying they're sending emails back and forth, which sounds like what I told PMs not to do in 2009. You know? And it's like number 11.
I know. I do know what you mean. But I mean, I still wonder, because I think I was saying earlier, if you're a translator and you work for 15 different LSPs and you don't know who's going to be sending you work and when, you have to be either logged into all 15 different platforms at the same time to actually receive a task, or let's say you're operating your email, you've got to then go click and log in every time to accept or deny. So I think, that's kind of how I see it.
I mean, maybe it's not 15, maybe it's 7 or 8 or 9, but still, it's just, to me, this is, it just shows how varied this industry is, right? On the one hand, you have, like, you know, cutting edge tech. On the other hand, people are sending files and emails, and you know, I don't know.
I mean,
just to me,
I reckon the best is having automation that sends out, you know, automated emails. So, like, basically, the linguists are getting notified via email, and they can click to accept or reject, for example. So you're maybe, I don't know.
I'd
like to do it like that if I was on that side, I think.
I'm trying really hard to get away from email. It's like a to-do list, and I think I've succeeded.
Yeah,
so
I know.
Hopefully the LSPs, some of these LSPs and some of the linguists that are doing this are
they need an integration with like Asana or something like that. So everything comes
Asana.
in.
Asana's going to go public. Let's buy some shares. By the same token, another thing that just won't go away as a hassle or a problem is OCR. Let's just very quickly, we ran a story just yesterday about this. Any breaking news there, or?
Breaking news. No. if you can say that, it's still a problem or it's still a pain, let's call that breaking news. But no, it's the news is, yes, OCR is still challenging. So you've got a whole ton of documents, PDF, scans, screenshots, JPEGs, images, which are very challenging to deal with for project managers and others. So, you know, you obviously need to get that optical character recognition done in order to get the word count, the analysis and the quoting. There's a whole ton of tools out there that you might have signed up to do that OCR step for you. But yeah, there's still quite a way to go, I think, to actually make it useful, make it at least sort of seamless.
I think though they're starting, I mean, they've probably used for a while now, but the whole neural component, like the machine learning and kind of image recognition part, that's very different from 5 years ago. I think now some of these tools are using these types of machine learning models to do OCR, right? And
yeah,
that
exactly.
should be a lot easier.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some offerings from LSPs, and I think some other startups as well that are looking at ways to interact with AI and then also plug in machine translation behind the OCR. And there's lots of research going into how to make OCR better as well. So, yeah.
It is a big problem. I mean, you can do all the automation on the planet, but then you're getting a poorly, scanned PDF.
Handwritten document or something.
Yeah, handwritten document, right? Handwritten is probably not the big volumes, right? But still, like somebody scans a contract somewhere in Japan and then, hey, here's 200 pages. I need it back tomorrow for some litigation case. Well, you read some great OCR to get that out.
Well, and I think as well, one of the things that they're wanting to work on really is provision for what we would call low resource languages in the field of machine translation. So just for those that are not maybe the top spoken languages around the world. That's one of the ways. I think basically non-English and a few others, those languages really need a lot more help and work on OCR.
I don't think OCR is on top of Gene's mind. Gene Schriver, again, the CEO of GLOBO, because they're very strong in VRI, virtual remote interpreting. So there's not much OCR in VRI. But let's
he
find
might surprise us, yeah.
I don't think so. Okay, let's hop over and talk to Gene in, as usual, just 1 second. And we're back here at Slator Pod with Gene Schriver, the founder and CEO of GLOBO. Hi, Gene.
Hi, everybody.
Hiya.
So, where are we finding you today?
We're finding me in the dining room of my house, which is like the best lighting. I figure, I usually do these. We've been on a few Zoom calls where I've been in sort of the dungeon office, but I figured, since this is such an international broadcast, that I'd try to step up the background game.
Step up the background, and the house is where?
Oh, we're in suburban Philadelphia.
There you go. Suburban Philadelphia, yeah. We're
East Coast of the United
oceans.
States. For those who don't know, we're sort of between New York City and Baltimore. Second largest city on the East Coast in the U.S.
Yeah. So we got London, Zurich, and Philadelphia. Last time we had Peter on from Latvia, so we're crossing oceans. Great. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Great to have you on. Also, we talked a lot about translation, localization, and now also I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course, on interpreting VRI and your core business. So maybe just give us a bit of a personal introduction, professional background. How did you get into the language industry and so forth?
Sure. So I sort of fell into the language industry. I was introduced to it by my mother, who was an interpreter and the founder of a language services company herself. I'm a lawyer by training. I went to law school, and once I got out of law school, I think I realized very early on that was not the job that I wanted to have for the rest of my life. So I was lucky enough to get recruited out to the West Coast during the first dot-com bubble era, and got early exposure to tech in the late 90s. And once that bubble burst, was with my then girlfriend, now wife. We were thinking about raising a family, and we knew that we didn't feel like doing that in Los Angeles, since both our families were in Philadelphia. Moved home, spent some time at my mother's office at LSA, and started to put two and two together that I thought I could help grow the business. She asked me to stay, and I was, at that time I was thinking about going back to a law firm. I wasn't exactly sure what my next move was, at some point I realized that there were, knowing what I then knew about tech and the internet and what was coming and how the economy was just becoming global at that time, that there was going to be a huge opportunity for this. So I stuck around in that business for almost 10 years. And after a pretty unfortunate breakup, which is sort of classic family business tragedy, went out on my own and started what I hope to be a much more pure tech play. And so the difference for for me, for GLOBO, was that I started spending all of my initial investments on engineers as opposed to project managers and sales folks. All my initial investment was in engineering and building a code library that really took 3 years before we even launched its beta version.
Okay, so, well, tell us maybe just a bit more about that kind of those early days, and also we asked it last time to Peter. Like, is there an elevator pitch, like I don't know, a 3-4 sentence pitch or description for what GLOBO does?
Yeah, so we set out to be the first unified platform with 6 lines of service available. And it was a true tech platform. I know I had been in the business for long enough to know that everyone sold that they were a one-stop shop, that they were good at everything, that they could sell you everything. But really on the back end, it was always some sort of Frankenstein of services. We were either using other partners to do it, or you had to log into different platforms to access anything. And I wanted that to truly be the solution where with a single login that you could manage, access, manage, and track 6 lines of service. So what we did was we built a unified platform with a native cloud communications platform built in that includes telephone interpreting, or what some people know as OPI, VRI, chat and email translation, which is quick turn short form translation on demand, on-site interpreter scheduling, project-based translation, and fluency testing. And it was our goal to build a simple, elegant UI, UX design with that native cloud communications platform built in, so having the ability to do text, audio, and video straight through the platform, and to also provide robust dashboards with data and analytics, which was, something that I thought was sorely missing in our space before. A lot of times, we would run into situations where there was no transparency about what was going on underneath the hood, and this was becoming such a strategic initiative for large organizations that I knew that customers were going to demand more transparency about service levels, but also data and about their interactions with, for us, limited English-speaking consumer populations.
So out of those 6 business lines, and you have that dashboard. So which one found, I guess, the most traction, or maybe which are the top 2 right now? Because it's quite broad, right? If you have document translation, the scheduling, the VRI.
It is. On-demand is the dominant player for us. It is the most predictable sort of recurring revenue model. We usually work with customers in all, you think of essential services to function in society. So, we're largely in the U.S. right now. Mm-hmm. We are 80% focused on healthcare, and that is because at the top of the hierarchy of essential needs is healthcare, access to government services. If you have a car, you need to have car insurance. So insurance companies, if you have a house, you probably have a mortgage. So we work with mortgage servicers. So those are the primary verticals that are dealing with a limited English-speaking consumer population many times a day, every day. And so the on-demand services, to be able to communicate with them, is what is the biggest driver of our business.
So you mentioned there the US healthcare system. For our non-US listeners, non-US audiences, can you explain maybe the key drivers for language services in the US healthcare space?
Sure. So for one thing, it's a requirement. The U.S. accrediting body for healthcare providers is called the Joint Commission here, and under accreditation standards, hospitals and healthcare providers are required to have a language access plan. And when they have a patient present at the ER or call in to schedule, they're required to healthcare providers are required to provide language support services for those patients.
Now, was that how old is that regulation? Has that always been around, or is it something like Clinton era, Obama era, or?
Well, so in the Clinton administration, Executive Order 13166, which was the executive order that, well, we all know it when we're in this space over here. So we know it by rote. So I don't have it in front of me, but that was the order that said that anybody receiving federal funds, any federal agency or any agency, state or local, which everyone in the U.S. at some level gets federal funds, is required to provide language access, meaningful access to services with language support, because the guidance was around, if you didn't do that, then it was considered a Title VI violation, which is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So it was considered discrimination against national origin if you did not provide meaningful language support services for a taxpayer that had limited English skills.
Mm. And you said before on demand, so just there's a few of those. For me, on demand means VRI, or is on demand also OPI, or is it the same? Like OPI would, so just maybe clarify the terminology there.
Sure. So it is the same. They are one and the same, and they live in a unified platform for us. So we actually have some interpreters that can switch modes in the same login. We have access to less languages for VRI than we do for TI. We provide support in 250 languages on demand for TI or OPI for just audio, it takes a little more to be ready for video, for prime time in video, and so that's a slightly different model. And we have less languages available, but we're growing that part of the business all the time. It's just about making sure that the workforce is ready for it.
And then, so the on-demand element refers to it might not be scheduled in advance, for example, and you have a certain time frame within which you have to find an interpreter? That's
correct. So the moment you need it, depending on how long tail the language is, whether the language is of lesser diffusion, you'll typically wait a little longer for them because we have less interpreters that are logged in on the platform. The rarer the language. But if you're looking for the top 10, 20 languages, our customers can expect to get an interpreter connected to them within seconds.
So interesting. So for you, the telephone versus video, it kind of doesn't really matter from a platform point of view, right?
The tech is basically the same. I mean, video runs differently, but it actually was something that we had to figure out to unify those platforms. So in the same technology, in the same interface, an interpreter could do both video and audio.
Because we had a CEO of a major OPI company at our SlatorCon conference in 2018 from Cyricom, and he said, the video uptake has been much slower than he would have anticipated maybe 10 years ago. But again, that was in 2018. And then he said, there will be a tipping point for video, but I just don't know what it is. So was COVID the tipping point? Like, or not really?
Probably. We're a lag leader to what telemedicine will be long term. We think that telehealth has been normalized as a result of COVID. I think, especially for patients in the older generation that, don't adopt technology as quickly. I think once that patient population saw just how easy it was to log in and click a button and be able to not have to leave their home to, see their healthcare provider, I think that it has been normalized now. And we've seen IPOs of telemedicine companies, recently in the US, very successful IPOs. We've seen stock prices of some of the bigger players start to soar. And so, when COVID hit, we certainly started to pivot our strategic efforts, not that we weren't, pursuing them as well, but, every healthcare transaction that wasn't COVID related, your day-to-day doctor's appointments, which is, much of the bread and butter of what we do, were canceled, right? So anything that was non-critical, any elective procedures, any sort of normal appointments that were scheduled were canceled until, and then eventually a lot of healthcare systems then had to quickly either onboard or pivot to making sure that all their providers were using a telemedicine platform. So then, of course, we're running to continue to partner with telehealth platforms and write APIs and integrations with them, so that when they're doing this home-based care, you can have a third party and still instantaneously request an interpreter and have that third party join the call. And not all the telemedicine platforms, we think of Zoom and some of the other video platforms that are out there as being like, oh, we can get as many tiles up on the screen as we want to, but it's actually not so simple to do more than one-to-one. So there required a reasonably significant build out and change in the roadmap for a lot of video platforms to make that possible.
So that's interesting then, if you're working quite considerably with these telehealth, and how does it work with Zoom or the other major video conference platforms? Do you sit on top of those? Are you plugged in?
It's usually an API integration, and we're not the only ones that are capable of doing it, but there's engineering work that needs to be done on both sides, and then there has to be a language or a protocol for the two systems to talk, to communicate, and then the workflow, right? So the way it renders, that's the kind of thing that needs to be configured, and sometimes is less complicated, and sometimes not so much. And then when you think about telemedicine, they were drinking from a fire hose when this first started to happen, and even getting their attention for the language piece was sometimes difficult because they knew there was a need, but a lot of them were like, there's very little that we can do more than we're doing right now just to service the majority of the population, which isn't limited English proficient. So they're like, we're just, we're flooded with getting things up and running and implementations with new health systems. And they're like, talk to us in June or talk to us in July. And those things are actually starting to happen now once, once those platforms have gotten their feet under them. But there are a lot of new players in that space that are popping up left and right, doing very cool stuff, working on common technology that allows us to integrate a lot faster. And they've been more agile, and we've done some faster integrations with some players that weren't even around a year ago.
That's very interesting. So my question is also on when you're working with those telehealth or the bigger platforms, like will they open it up to basically everybody, or do they want to kind of retain a few core like vendors or platforms as kind of a nice feature add-on, or where do you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple layers to think about that question. One is, does a health system that decides to onboard, one of the big telehealth platforms like Teladoc or Amwell, for example, bring their language vendor with them and then force it on the tech solution on the telehealth platform, which can happen, and in that case, the tech solution has to have an open enough API to be able to work with multiple workflows. But for the most part, I mean, you'll see lots of variation in what people want to achieve. The most effective way to do it is to pick a partner and make that work well, right? Especially in the beginning, because it's still pretty new for most of them. And just getting one solution to work well has usually been the focus. I think even when I started GLOBO, the idea was that this could be a front-end platform for the whole LSP world to use as their interface with their customers. We never intended to really build out too much back-end other than the communications platform. So we were never going to build a TMS, for example. And we wanted the ability for the platform to serve as an ultimate exchange. That's proven, a couple of players have tried to make that happen, and it's proven to be rather difficult because it really is a managed service, right? These are professionals, and we're talking like a distributed workforce model, like a gig economy model, where you've got to get interpreters that want to be sticky on your platform, that want to work on the platform, and just handing over the keys to it being like an open market exchange just gets pretty wonky. It's hard to do QA with it. It's hard to get consistency from it. So it ultimately ends up being really, really nice technology layered on a managed workforce.
Get it. Okay.
You mentioned there wanting, having linguists and interpreters wanting to be on your platform. How do you find and retain that kind of freelancer linguistic talent that you need?
Yeah. So one of the founding pillars for me when I started GLOBO was to treat interpreters better than I had seen them be treated in the past, and that came in a lot of different forms. One was to actually give them technology tools that made them want to be on the platform, that told them about how they were performing, how they might be performing against their peers, how much they were earning, what they, to give them tools to get better at their craft, to give them live tools that would allow them during a transaction to actually, provide more accuracy or give them background about who they were talking to, and make sure that we did skill grouping very specifically designed for each particular client. In the olden days, you would pick up a landline phone as an interpreter and hit a DTMF tone to log into a platform and wait for the phone to ring. And we just thought that was not a fun way to live. We know that interpreters, especially the ones that were, work from home, felt isolated. They had no sense of community. We wanted to truly create a sense of community. So in addition to and we wanted to feel like, they could get better at their job and we would be communicating with them. They weren't just a number that was next up on the auto dialer. And so, we've done some things to gamify the system, to make it more engaging, to connect the interpreters to their peer network, because a lot of providers previously wanted to isolate interpreters from talking to each other too much for reasons, I'm sure we all understand.
Still do. Yeah.
Right, they do. Well, we try not to do that. So we've even started, but we wanted to take care of the interpreters' mental wellness as well, and their sense of belonging and sense of support. There are interpreters that, are going from filing a claim about a fender bender with their car to a pre-op discussion before open heart surgery. I mean, the wave of emotions that they go from transaction to transaction multiple times a day is a big burden to bear. So we started doing running interpreter decompression sessions, which we mix up groups by language, by whether they're medical, legal, all sorts of different ways to put interpreters together essentially in a big Zoom room, and they talk through issues that they've experienced with our QA team. They share stories with each other. They socialize, and we do that regularly. And we've had some of these decompression sessions that have gotten, up into the hundreds of interpreters that have joined. Not everyone participates. We do some smaller groups, and we just make sure that the people on our QA team are people that are in it, that have been professional interpreters for a long time, that have wisdom to share and empathy for what everyone's going through. So it's incredibly important. We use the word empathy quite a bit at GLOBO, and that is not only for our customers, but it's for our employees with each other, and it's very much for the interpreters, because we think that by having the happiest workforce, we will attract and retain the best talent.
I think that is a very, sorry,
go ahead.
I think this is a very good point. I mean, people tend to forget that, also in the language industry, when you're working, like, for example, at a translation side on technical content, or maybe in like big conferences, that the content is very different from what you're describing, right? What you're describing is super personal. It's emotionally challenging to do that. And then, I like the example you made, like from a fender bender to like open heart surgery. Like you have to switch very, very quickly. And then I actually never really thought about it that way. So this is, very, very interesting.
It is wild. I mean, you literally can go from, how do I catch up with my mortgage payment to, talking about, and this is a real scenario that we've encountered, talking to someone's parents, being the conduit between a child who is not going to survive, and having hospital administration talk to their parents about harvesting organs for organ donation. it's wild. They go through some really intense stuff. And, you can imagine in language, when you go through any kind of healthcare situation, we are dealing with people in conversations that really matter to their lives, right? All of those things matter. When we're talking about essential services, it's like your bank account matters, your access to government matters, especially your access to understanding what's going on in healthcare matters. When you're in language in healthcare, you're already in a scary situation, and it's tough to comprehend even when you're in language. So throw on a language barrier to that and imagine, just what the patient and or the patient's family feels, and to be able to provide, an empathetic, really trained and qualified interpreter in that situation really makes a difference for people every day.
Mm. And I suppose it's the full spectrum of anything that a human could reasonably expect to experience in their life that interpreters are dealing with, day in, day out. But
that's true. And Esther, when you talk about, or Florian, when you talk about, conference interpreting, and the speaker, and the speaker is going to be going for 45 minutes, or the subject, and you get into a groove or a rhythm. We're talking about really short form transactions that can vary wildly, and the players are very different. So the LEP is different. There's people that are irritated. There's people that are happy. There are people that don't like the fact that they need to use an interpreter, and so not only are the subjects difficult and varied, and there's rapid iteration of them, but so are the personalities involved.
And then how does the
I was going to ask. I suppose I was going to say something topical, which I suppose interpreters and also communities are having to get their head around, is obviously COVID, interpreting for COVID and dealing with that. What can you talk to us about COVID and some of its effects?
Yeah. So, I think I mentioned that there was an impact in healthcare, since we are so heavily in healthcare, that in the beginning of quarantine, all healthcare transactions that weren't critical or COVID related were canceled, rescheduled. The good thing about that is that it was delayed demand as opposed to destroyed demand, because all those healthcare needs still existed. They just needed to punt until they could either do it through telemedicine or they could reschedule it when it was safe to do so. So while we saw a significant dip in that traffic in the beginning of COVID, we've actually not only gotten back to sea level, but gone above as people started to, begin to reschedule all the appointments that they had canceled during COVID. For us, the business interruption was almost nil. I mean, we were built on a distributed workforce model, and while we do have an office, we were used to Zoom and Slack, and we had our own, cloud communications platform to begin with. So there was no hiccup, no service interruption, or even any kind of decay in service levels when it happened. In fact, we had a lot more availability because everyone was home. So suddenly the entire workforce was logged in, and service levels actually improved during quarantine.
And you mentioned some of the investor interest in some of the IPOs in the space. Like there's been a fair amount of activity also in the SaaS space, in the broader translation, management thing. Like, how do you see this investor interest now going into the language industry, and specifically, like, interpreting your area? What are you seeing there?
There's, as you know, there's significant interest in the space. There's a lot of dry powder out there still, right? So there's been a lot of invested money that has not been deployed yet. So that's the reality of the capital markets right now, and so it's very competitive for those private equity firms to get that capital deployed. That's their job, is to put that money to work. And the language industry, really did well. Well, let me check that. If you're a pure on-site interpreting business, you got crushed. A lot of folks got gutted if they did not have some sort of backup plan or partner like GLOBO or another platform to be able to offer to do that, to do interpreting remotely. But otherwise, what we've seen is that the industry has done well through it. And I think as a vertical in general, that we're sort of the last, I hate to use an antiquated cliche, but we may be sort of the last good-looking girl at the dance because COVID shook out so many other industries that, the language industry still will show very well when this is all over. When you start to make high growth lists like we have, we won the EY Interpreter of the Year award,
and the Inc. 5000 is just
Inc.
out.
5000 are like
Yeah.
six years in a row on the Inc. 5000. Your inbox is filled with private equity outreach every day.
Nice.
Those are like lead lists for them, right? So you make one of those lists, they're like, all right, let's get on it. We're certainly exploring the capital markets. We have investment bankers retained. We're, looking at acquisitions ourselves all the time. We're looking at, financial partners and evaluating what we're going to do to accelerate our growth. And that's exactly what our plan has been. So, we're invested heavily in it. There is a lot of interest out there from the private equity world. And, we will play both parts of, buyer and seller when it makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. So maybe just take a bit of a macro look here. I mean, you've been doing this now for a while, and like what were in your part of the business, what were some of the top 2, 3 kind of dynamics that have changed over the past, 5, 7, 10 years that you've kind of observed some kind of macro shifts in that environment?
The macro shifts, the thing that I think we've all seen the biggest impact on is that MT is actually starting to, have some impact on top line for the translation heavy providers. I talk to executives and salespeople from around the industry. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, so I've got lots of friends in the business, both in the U.S. and abroad. And by the way, this is a great way to connect with all of them. I love that. The fact that we, don't have like Elia and Gala and, and the ALC and all our industry conferences really bums me out because I love this industry and I love the people in it. So yeah, the macro impact has ultimately been on those things that you can't provide in person and those services that are being squeezed by technological innovation. Where interpreting ends up on that list, I think it's a ways out, but I certainly keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on in that world. We'll never, we will never beat Google for a speech to speech translation technology. But that said, IBM has been working on this for 50 years and feels like we see a new announcement, a new press release every week about these major advances. And I think those advances are a lot more incremental than the press releases would indicate.
And maybe also in your part of the business, you would probably almost never want to have a technology doing the actual linguistic part because you wouldn't want to get a cancer diagnosis from a computer, right? I mean, or maybe at some point people would adjust, but like right now, I couldn't imagine, right?
Well, I think I may have said that exact line to you at some point, but that is the truth. So you've got 3 legs of technology to power a conversation, right? You have speech recognition, which is not perfect. We all know. Just try Siri out. We know that text translation, MT, is not great. Just try Google Translate out. It's getting better all the time. And then after that, you've got to have text back to speech, which is wonky. So you're exactly right. Well, I think that gisting and social conversations that where the stakes aren't as high, like help me get directions to this museum, is a lot different than a doctor giving a patient a diagnosis. And even if the tech were perfection or near perfection, where's the empathy in talking to, like you said, a computer or a bot? I think that even given the choice to do that, I think that's the last thing that will go, is the lack of empathy that would come with just delivering important information via technology.
Yeah, so that's puts you in a very, well, in a somewhat different position from the text-heavy providers, right? So for the next 2 to 3, I don't know, maybe longer, what's the vision? Where are the growth opportunities? Where are you guys putting your focus and priorities?
We are putting our focus and priorities primarily in healthcare and essential services, but our plans for the future are to build to complete multi-tenancy, so that actually the rest of the LSP world can use the same technology to run the front end of their business as we do. They can pick their back ends, whatever they want to do. They can run the platform and use their own individual linguist and roll over to the general pool when they're not available. They can use any TMS they want, any sort of scheduling system. What we want to do is provide a simple, elegant user interface that doesn't require any training, is not clunky, that's beautiful presentation to their customers, so that the customers, and then also give them the ability to add additional services. So the vast majority of the 25,000 LSPs out there are small translation shops and or on-site shops. So we want to broaden, but they also have great relationships, and they are also these million points of light that have the ability to be channel distributors of services that they otherwise wouldn't have the ability to invest in. So our growth story right now is selling direct and sort of perfecting the technology and ultimately sharing it with the LSP community.
Great. Well, a lot of them will be listening in on that. So hopefully they pick up on that. So thanks so much for doing this. It was really very, very interesting. I learned a lot.
Yeah, same.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Esther. This was terrific. Good to see you both.
Thank you, Gene.
Excellent. All right.
See you
Take
soon.
care. Bye-bye.